Picture this. Offshore powerboats ripping across open water at 120 miles an hour, rooster tails shooting sky high, and engines screaming so loud you'd swear the ocean itself was protesting. Now imagine those engines suddenly breathing in laughing gas, nitrous oxide. Not for a quick drag race, but for miles and miles of brutal offshore competition. Sounds insane, right? Well, it happened. OMC's mighty V8 two-strokes and Mercury's racing V6s once danced with nitrous in a bid to outmuscle each other. The result? Speed so dangerous and power so shocking that the governing bodies had to step in and shut it all down. Today, we're diving into the banned world of nitrous-fed outboards, the rivalry, the chaos, and why this forbidden chapter of marine racing history still has gearheads talking. Before nitrous even entered the chat, OMC and Mercury were already in a war. The battleground? Offshore powerboat racing in the late 1970s and 1980s. Mercury had built its empire on V6 outboards, the kind of engines that were as much a part of American boating culture as Budweiser on a summer dock. Then came OMC, Outboard Marine Corporation, with a move so bold it shocked the industry. They unleashed a 3.5-liter V8 outboard. Yes, a V8 on the back of a raceboat. If Mercury's V6 was like a finely tuned middleweight boxer, the OMC V8 was a heavyweight slugger. It had brute force, 400 horsepower potential, and a sound that was less outboard purr and more Detroit muscle car on water. Offshore fans loved it. Mercury fans? They were furious, and Mercury engineers were scrambling. Now here's where the analogy kicks in. Imagine NASCAR suddenly allowing Tesla to enter with rocket boosters strapped to the back. That's how disruptive OMC's V8 was to the scene. Mercury had dominated offshore classes with its V6s, but the sheer torque and top end of OMC's monster changed the rules of the game. Now, before we dive deeper, make sure to subscribe if you're liking this VHDEO. What comes ahead is going to leave you shocked. But even with all that displacement, OMC wasn't satisfied. Offshore racing wasn't about cruising, it was about humiliating your rivals in front of packed marinas. And while the V8 was fast, endurance races required bursts of speed that could make or break a lead. Enter nitrous oxide. Nitrous in boats worked the same way it does in cars. Inject it into the combustion chamber, and suddenly you've got a denser oxygen charge, more fuel, and a fiery explosion that makes pistons work overtime. On land, drag racers used nitrous for a few seconds at a time. Offshore, crews were flirting with using it in longer bursts, which is like trying to run a marathon while chugging energy drinks every mile. When OMC experimented with nitrous on the 3.5-liter V8, horsepower estimates shot from 400 toward the 500 mark. Boats that already skimmed dangerously close to airborne started hitting speeds that scared even seasoned racers. Mercury, of course, wasn't going to sit around. Word spread that their race division quietly toyed with nitrous-fed V6s, pushing them into power brackets no sane lake boater would touch. And let me pause here. If you've ever over-revved a two-stroke dirt bike, you know the feeling of living on the edge of an engine seizure. Now multiply that by 8 cylinders, mix in nitrous, and drop it in a hull bouncing through 5-foot ocean chop. That's what nitrous-fed outboards were doing in the 1980s. So why ban it? 2 words: danger and fairness. Danger first. Offshore racing was already a high-risk sport. Boats flipped, drivers were ejected, and engines blew under normal conditions. Add nitrous-fed outboards, and you had catastrophic piston failures mid-race. Some accounts describe engines melting down like fireworks shows gone wrong, spraying water and shrapnel. When you're strapped in at 100 miles per hour, That's not a malfunction, it's a death sentence. Fairness second. Racing bodies realized that if nitrous became legal, it would trigger an arms race. Smaller teams without the budget to develop safe systems would be left behind. Worse, nitrous blurred class lines. Suddenly, a Mercury V6 with nitrous could challenge an OMC V8, but only in short bursts before risking meltdown. Officials saw where this was going. Escalating costs, rising danger, and races decided by who had the guts to push their engines to destruction. By the late 1980s, nitrous systems were explicitly banned in offshore outboard classes. OMC's V8 stayed on the scene, Mercury's V6 kept evolving, but the nitrous chapter became a whispered legend among racers. The time we went too far. Here's the kicker. Even without nitrous, the rivalry stayed brutal. Mercury doubled down on refining its V6s, introducing models like the T4, which technically wasn't even a V6, but a massive 4-liter flat, 6 designed to counter OMC's brute force. OMC, meanwhile, leaned into the raw marketing appeal of its V8. Fans picked sides the way people pick Coke or Pepsi. Mercury loyalists claimed OMC's V8 was a gimmick, too heavy, too thirsty, and destined for short-lived glory. OMC diehards fired back, saying Mercury's smaller displacement meant they were always chasing. Both had a point. The OMC V8 was a beast, but on long endurance runs, Mercury's lighter, nimbler packages often had the last laugh. But the nitrous experiments? Those were the flashpoint. They proved that outboards had no ceiling when it came to power, only limits set by human bravery and mechanical survival. And when those limits were breached, racing officials had no choice but to step in. Now let me ask you, would you strap yourself into a boat running nitrous-fed outboards in 6-foot waves at 110 miles per hour? Drop your answer in the comments, because honestly, I think most of us would prefer watching that chaos from the safety of a dock with a cold drink in hand. To make sense of how crazy this was, picture it like this. Nitrous in offshore outboards was the marine version of steroids in sports. Yeah, you'll hit new records, but the side effects are catastrophic. Engines blew like overtrained athletes collapsing mid-game. The thrill was undeniable, but so was the inevitable ban. Now the stage has been set, and what's about to follow will blow your mind. Don't miss out on this and subscribe while you're at it. Let's peel back the curtain. While racing bodies banned nitrous in competition, that didn't stop teams from experimenting in secret. Dyno shops across Florida, Wisconsin, and even OMC's own test facilities became laboratories for controlled chaos. Engineers bolted nitrous kits to both OMC's V8s and Mercury's V6s, chasing data points that sounded like science fiction at the time. On the V8, dyno pulls with nitrous often cracked the 500 horsepower barrier. Remember, this was in the mid-1980s, when a stock family outboard made 150 horsepower on a good day. OMC's nitrous-fed V8 was making the equivalent of 3 base boats combined. The problem? Durability. Pistons showed signs of melting, connecting rods twisted, and crankshafts that normally held up fine under 400 horses suddenly looked like pretzels. Mercury's V6s faced their own demons. Pushing 2.4 and 2.5-liter race blocks with nitrous was like feeding a hummingbird an espresso shot. The initial burst was incredible, extra 75 to 100 horsepower at the flip of a switch, but longevity was non-existent. A few test sessions reportedly ended with engines locking solid in under 30 seconds of nitrous use. It was like playing Russian roulette with pistons. You didn't know if you'd get one glorious pull or a pile of shrapnel. Talk to old-school offshore racers, and they'll grin when nitrous comes up. They knew it was the ultimate cheat code. In a straightaway drag, nitrous could launch a boat like a slingshot, closing gaps in seconds. But every driver also knew the price. When that motor popped, it wasn't just a blown race. It was a potential rescue mission. Stories circulate of boats coming back on tow lines with smoking cowls, their power heads cooked beyond repair. Mechanics would pull the heads and see piston crowns with holes burned straight through them, like someone had attacked them with a blowtorch. In one legendary case, an OMC V8 on nitrous reportedly split a cylinder block clean in half. Imagine the strength it takes to snap cast iron like a cracker. That's what nitrous could do under extreme load. It became a gambler's game. Do you take the safe line and trust your naturally aspirated setup, or do you roll the dice with nitrous for a shot at glory? Most teams knew the answer when trophies and sponsorship money were on the line. To understand why these failures were so spectacular, you've got to picture the internal chaos. Nitrous oxide, when injected, breaks down under heat and releases oxygen. More oxygen means you can burn more fuel. The explosion inside the cylinder suddenly gets much more violent. In car racing, that's manageable with reinforced parts and short bursts. But in two-stroke outboards? Disaster waiting to happen. Two-strokes already run hotter, rev higher, and rely on a delicate balance of oil and fuel for lubrication. Add nitrous, and that balance goes out the window. Detonation, uncontrolled combustion, becomes rampant. Pistons don't just wear out, they disintegrate. Cylinder walls don't just scratch, they collapse. Think of it like asking a marathon runner to sprint every mile while chugging whiskey. Sure, you'll get a burst of speed, but sooner or later, the body gives up in spectacular fashion. That was a nitrous-fed two-stroke outboard in a nutshell. By the late 80s, nitrous had already earned its outlaw status in the offshore world. The American Powerboat Association and other sanctioning bodies tightened rulebooks, explicitly banning chemical supercharging. What's fascinating, though, is how that decision didn't kill innovation, it redirected it. Mercury shifted focus to bigger displacement, naturally aspirated engines, leading to developments like the T4, and later to modern supercharged four-strokes, like the Verado series. OMC, meanwhile, doubled down on showcasing the raw grunt of its 3.5-liter V8 as a marketing icon. The V8 never became a mass-market success. Too thirsty, too heavy, too niche, but it remains one of the most recognizable outboards ever bolted to a transom. And nitrous? It faded into racing folklore, but the lesson stuck. Outboard performance could go sky high, but durability and safety had to keep up. Fast forward to today. The outboards on the market, Mercury Racing's 450R, Yamaha's VMAX SHO, or even Oxy diesel monsters, owe a debt to that wild era. Engineers now chase performance with supercharging, turbocharging, direct fuel injection, and four-stroke efficiency. But the obsession with squeezing more power out of smaller packages? That mindset was forged in the nitrous years. Mercury's current lineup leans heavily on forced induction, technology that achieves what nitrous promised, but with sustainability. OMC may be gone, but their audacity in dropping a V8 outboard still echoes in Yamaha's 425 XTO offshore and Mercury's V10-400. Big displacement, high output, all built on the principle that there's always someone out there willing to push boundaries. In other words, nitrous walked so superchargers and V10s could run. So here's a thought. If nitrous had never been banned, do you think today's outboards would be running chemical boost systems as a factory option? Imagine a Mercury 600R Nitrous Edition sitting in a showroom. Drop your thoughts below. I know some of you gearheads would sell your truck just to bolt one on. When we talk about racing technology, it's easy to celebrate the winners, the engines that set records, won championships, and built legacies. But the truth is, the failures often carry the most fascinating stories. OMC's nitrous-fed V8s and Mercury's nitrous-fed V6s are a perfect example. On paper, they looked unstoppable. Nitrous promised horsepower gains that could turn already fearsome outboards into monsters. In practice, they blew up more engines than they won races. Pistons melted, cylinder blocks split, and crankshafts twisted into scrap. These weren't just breakdowns, they were spectacular mechanical meltdowns. But that's exactly why they're remembered. They were expensive, dangerous, and ultimately unsustainable. Yet they embodied something pure, the rebellious spirit of engineering. It was never about safety or longevity. It was about finding out just how far an outboard could be pushed before it self-destructed. That willingness to risk everything in pursuit of speed is what made this chapter so compelling. Even though nitrous was quickly banned from sanctioned offshore racing, its legend never really died. Ask any veteran racer from the 1980s, and you'll see the grin before you hear the words, "Yeah, we tried nitrous. It was insane." It's the same cultural echo that makes car enthusiasts laugh about Fast and Furious quotes, "I need NOS." The truth is, forbidden power always holds an allure. And in the story of OMC and Mercury, nitrous wasn't just a tool. It was a temptation, one that proved too wild to last, but too legendary to forget. The story of nitrous-fed OMC V8s and Mercury V6s is the story of temptation. Temptation to go faster, to win at any cost, to throw caution, and pistons to the wind. It was banned for good reasons, but its shadow looms large over the history of outboard racing. And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway. The boats of today are safer, stronger, and faster in sustainable ways because the pioneers of yesterday weren't afraid to break engines, break rules, and sometimes even break themselves. So the next time you hear the roar of a Mercury Racing 450R or see a classic OMC V8 gleaming on a restored offshore rig, remember, there was a time when those engines flirted with nitrous and the water was wilder than ever. What do you think? Should nitrous have stayed legal, or was banning it the only sane choice? Let me know in the comments because I'd love to hear your take. If you enjoyed this deep dive into outboard racing's forbidden history, hit that like button, subscribe for more insane marine stories, and share this with a friend who still thinks nitrous is just for drag cars. Trust me, they need to know this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.